Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming.
Good morning, and you're very welcome to this morning's Signpost webinar. My name is Pat Murphy, Head of Environment Knowledge Transfer with Teagasc. And this morning's webinar is brought to you in association with Dairy Sustainability Ireland, Food Drink Ireland, SkillNet, and National Rural Network. Over the last couple of weeks, we've focused on water quality, and over the next couple of weeks, we're shifting to biodiversity. And I'm delighted to be joined by Saorla Kavanagh. Saorla is EIP Project Coordinator on the Protecting Farmland Pollinators EIP, and she's based in the National Biodiversity Data Centre in Waterford. Saorla, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Pat. I'm delighted to be here.
You might give us a little bit of a background as to how you ended up in Waterford protecting our biodiversity.
So I moved to Waterford to work on this project. So I'm managing Protecting Farmland Pollinators, which is coordinated by the National Biodiversity Data Centre and an initiative of the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan. I've got a research background in pollinators and also honey and chemistry and the landscape. So they're my research interests. So this job kind of was right up my alley.
Very good, very good. I'm also joined by Andy Boland. Andy will be helping with the questions later. So, Saorla, without further ado, I might get you to share your presentation, and as usual, we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. So I'd encourage you to use the Q&A to put your questions.
Thank you very much. So as I said, the Protecting Farmland Pollinators is coordinated by the National Biodiversity Data Centre and an initiative of the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan. It's an EIP project and it's funded by the European Agricultural Fund for Rural Development. And in Ireland, that's managed by the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. So EIPs, or European Innovation Partnership projects, were brought about to come up with innovative ideas to address potential problems that are facing us. They were looking for innovative ideas that had wider application. They weren't exclusively related to the environment, but this one is obviously related to the environment. What I think is one of the greatest successes of the EIPs is that it uses a multi-actor approach. So they're bringing researchers and farmers and advisors and different organisations together to come up with solutions to potential problems. So in Ireland and worldwide, we are in a biodiversity crisis, and how we manage the land is going to impact on the diversity of species that can be found. So the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan and the National Biodiversity Data Centre came together with a proposal for protecting farmland pollinators. And the hope is that we can change how the land is managed from something that may not be very pollinator friendly to a place where pollinators and wider biodiversity can not only survive but thrive. So the project received €1.2 million in funding, and it's being run over a 5-year period. And we recruited 40 farmers to the project. And most of these farmers are in County Kildare, but some of them are in bordering counties. So we have 10 beef, 10 dairy, 10 mixed and 10 tillage farmers involved in the project. And I just wanted to note that from here on, I will refer to tillage farmers as arable farmers for any potential international people tuning in. So within each farm type, we had different farming intensities. So we wanted to have farms that would have high inputs and high outputs, as well as farms that might have low inputs and low outputs. And then we also have different farmer attitudes involved in the project. So farmers that would be interested in managing areas of their farm for biodiversity, and those that aren't. And lastly, which was just by chance, we managed to get farms that had different household incomes involved. So farms that where the whole household income is reliant on the farm, compared to those where the household income is not solely reliant on the farm. We're operating a results-based payment mechanism. So each year, farmers receive pollinator points, and those points equate to a monetary reward that the farmers receive annually. And in year one, collectively, the 40 farmers drew down just over €63,000 And this increased to just over €93,000 in year 3. And then we also conducted a series of farm surveys. So we wanted to find out if this results-based payment is accurately reflecting the pollinators that are on the farms. So we had 4 aims that we wanted to address. We wanted to help farms become more pollinator friendly. We wanted to identify actions that farmers can take that will not negatively impact on productivity. And to do this, we developed a whole farm pollinator scoring system and initiated a results-based payment method. And using this scoring system, we identified the best actions for pollinators on the farm. So the whole farm pollinator scorecard is based on providing food, safety, and shelter for pollinators on the farm. And it's not just about the quantity of these habitats, but the quality. So if you had 1 hectare of hay meadow, the quality comes into play when you look at the diversity of flowering plants within that hay meadow. And I'd like to highlight that the whole farm pollinator scorecard stems from the farmland actions to help pollinators, which were produced by the All Ireland Pollinator Plan. And these actions are evidence-based. The evidence that was used in these actions comes from other European countries and the UK. So what we wanted to do was to generate the evidence from within Ireland. We have a very unique landscape and fantastic farming industry here. We wanted to work with Irish farmers to see what suits Irish farmland. So we developed a scorecard with 19 actions. We have 4 actions for hedgerows and field margins. There are 6 actions for fields and flowers. We have 2 actions associated with pollinator-friendly trees, and there are 7 actions for not using pesticides. So each of the 19 actions on the scorecard have a unit of measurement associated with them. And this is just a one action example from the scorecard. So you can see you have action number 1 and the unit of measurement is meters. So this unit of measurement could be meters or hectares or the number of trees. And then there's the approximate amount. And then each action is weighted according to their value, to its value for pollinators. And this is based on research. And then each action is quality assessed using a range of 1 to 5, 1 being of lower quality and 5 being of higher quality. And then the score and payment are calculated. And I'd just like to highlight that the farmer fills in the scorecard each year, and they need to fill in the 2 shaded grey columns within the scorecard. So they fill in the approximate amounts of each of the actions, and they also fill in the range. I'd like to highlight the importance of rewarding for quality, and also give you an explanation as to how we do that within our scorecard. So for the first 4 actions on the scorecard, which are associated with hedgerows and field boundaries, the range is based on the number of flowering plants in flower within each of those features. And we would get an average for the whole farm. And then the other field actions, so hay meadow, for example, the range is based on the number of flowering plants. And the reason why we said that for the first 4 actions, the range needed to be based on the flowering plants in flower was to do with hedgerow management in one area, and then also the complexity of the hedgerows. So if you had a hawthorn hedge, you're only going to get flowers on mature wood. If a hawthorn hedge is cut every year, you're very unlikely to get flowers. Sorry, so the farmers have used these scorecards for 3 consecutive years now to score their farms. And out of the 40 farms, 31 have increased their score over the 3-year period. And in these 31 farms, 3 farmers have more than tripled their pollinator score. And you can see in this graph that the whole farm pollinator score has increased across all the different sectors. So there's an increase in beef farms, dairy farms, mixed farms, and arable farms across the 3 years. So how did farmers increase their scores? Well, by changing how they were managing their farms. So one of the easiest ways to increase your pollinator points is how you're managing your hedgerows. So by not cutting your hedge every year and maybe selecting a hedge that can be cut on a 2-year rotation, you're going to increase the floral resources for pollinators on your farm. And then another hedge could potentially be cut on a 3-year rotation. And maybe you can move the hedgerow, the field margin out from the hedgerow to allow ground flora to flourish. So we've moved the scorecard into an online tool. So using the Survey 123 application, the 19 actions can be accessed. We're assessing for the quantity of these actions and the quality of them. And the online tool provides tailored advice to the farmer. So the farmer receives guidance on how they can improve their score if they want to. And we're operating a 5-star platform system. So there's a number of stars, 1 to 5, and it's based on a range of points. So if a farm receives 5 gold stars, their farm is a haven for pollinators. So there are 3 sections to the online tool. We have the Survey 123 application, which is for collecting the data. It allows for photo upload, and there's private and limited access to this tool. And then we're using ArcGIS online data management portal to update and delete the data, to approve or reject surveys, and then to visualize the survey reports. And I think I'd like to highlight that the visualization functionalities within this, it's actually very user-friendly, and they calculate the average and the sums and the maximum and minimums of different actions automatically for you. And then lastly, we're using Power Automate to generate these automatic reports that the farmer receives. So once a scorecard is submitted and approved, the farmer receives an email with a PDF attachment explaining where they can improve their scores if they want to. So the tailored advice, the first page is the picture on the left here, where they have the farm ID, the date the scorecard was submitted, the name of the farmer, and the address. And then if your farm receives 5 gold stars, congratulations, your farm is a haven for pollinators, and thank you very much. And then the 19 actions are then listed with advice associated with each of them. I'd just like to highlight that with each action, we have a national average. So the farmer can see how they're faring compared to the average farms. And just important to highlight that our national average is only based on the farms with a submitted scorecard. So if we have 40 farmers engaged in the project and 40 farmers have submitted their score, our national average is 40. So I'd like to take you through some of the farm surveys that we conducted in 2020. We surveyed 9 features on the farms. So we identified habitats on a farm that could potentially provide floral resources for pollinators. So these are areas where you were likely to find pollinators. And then we also looked at 2 controlled fields. So we surveyed barley and pasture, and these are the sites that we were expecting not to find pollinators. So the farm surveys consisted of plant and pollinator surveys, as well as surveying hedgerow structure. So for the pollinator surveys, we focused on bees and hoverflies. And I think it's important to note that there are other important pollinators out there, but we focused on obligate pollinator obligate pollinator species, bees and hoverflies. And we conducted transect walks. We used pan trapping and malaise trapping. And just to highlight that the malaise trapping was only put on hedgerows, and we only put 2 malaise traps on 25 of the farms. It would have been logistically quite difficult to put malaise traps on the 40 farms. So for the plant surveys, again, we surveyed 9 features across on the 40 farms, and we use quadrats to assess the plants on the farms. So we had 2 control fields as well, the barley and the pasture. And we looked at species richness and floral units and percentage cover. So species richness is all the different species found within a quadrat. So we walked across a field with our quadrat, and at 5 different locations within that field, we put the quadrat down and we looked at the species richness. So in this picture of the quadrat here, you can see there's dandelion and there's also buttercup. So species richness equals 2 for this quadrat. And then the floral units essentially is counting flowers. So there are 5 dandelions in flower in this quadrat. For the hedgerows, it's a bit more of a complex habitat. So we walked 200 meters along the hedgerows in the farms, and we recorded the ground flora, the middle section of the hedge, and the upper section of the hedge. So I'm going to take you through some of the results that we have so far, and I'm going to focus on the pollinators. So across the 40 farms, we had 10 arable, 10 beef, 10 dairy, and 10 mixed. And within each farm type, we had various degrees of farming intensities. And overall, we recorded 8,659 pollinators, and 7,189 of these were identified to species level. So across the 40 farms, we had 37 bee species and 57 hoverfly species recorded. And you can see here in the donut graph that the most of these were hoverfly species. So that's the 63% Surfidae. They were all hoverflies. And then the second largest chunk of the donut is bumblebees at 21%, followed by the apis honeybees at 12% and 4% solitary bees. I'm showing a graph on honeybee abundance here. So this is the total number, the average total number of honeybees recorded in the different farm types. So you can just see that the mixed farms had the highest average honeybee abundance across the different farm types. And 36 of the 40 farmers we recorded honeybees on them. The reason why I'm showing a graph of honeybees here is because honeybees are not only wild pollinators in Ireland, but they're also managed. And it's difficult to detect whether or not a honeybee that you will see out in the field is managed or a wild bee. So for that reason, I've excluded honeybee data from all the rest of the graphs that I'm going to show you now, or from all the different the data that I will report. So you will see me refer to non-apis pollinators and non-apis bees, and that's simply because the honeybees are excluded from that data. So I'm going to report on the hedgerow data. So this is again for pollinators. So we're looking at solitary bees, bumblebees, and hoverflies. And we had 3 different sampling periods within the summer of 2020 where we looked at these pollinator species. We conducted transect walks, used pan traps and malaise trapping. So we have 3 different sampling periods and 3 different surveying methods. And if you just look at the sampling period number 1, the transect data is only for 39 farms. So unfortunately, one of the farms that is left out of the data analysis because one of the hedges could not be accessed to survey the pollinators. So there was a bull in the field and we decided not to risk it and go in and record the pollinators. So when we look at pollinators, we want to know about pollinator abundance, which is the total number of pollinators that you can see. And we also want to know about pollinator species richness. So if you walk down into your garden or on the street and you see 3 honeybees, 1 bumblebee and 1 hoverfly, your pollinator abundance is 5 because you have 3 + 1 + 1. But your pollinator species richness is 3 because you only saw 3 different species of pollinators. So when you're reporting on pollinator abundance, you generally use transect data. And for pollinator species richness, it's very useful to have different sampling methods to see if you get the same relationship. So just in terms of what bees were found on the hedges on the farms, so there were 24 different species of bee. So that's your species richness found across the 39 farms. And the average number of bees per farm was 5. 14 farms were above average, but that implies that 25 were below average. So there is definitely room for improvement. The maximum number of bees found on any one farm was 10 species, and that was an arable farm. And then the minimum found was 1 species. So the top 3 bees recorded across the farms. So number 1 was the Bombus lucorum aggregate. Number 2 was Bombus pascuorum, the common carder bee. Number 3 was Bombus lapidarius, the red-tailed bumblebee. So the top 3 bees found on the farms were all bumblebees. So I just want to mention that the most frequently recorded solitary bee was the orange-legged furrow bee, Halictus rubicundus. So looking at the hoverflies now, across the 39 farms, we had 40 different species of hoverflies recorded along the hedgerows. And the average number of species per farm was 9, and 14 farms were above average. And again, that implies that there was 25 farms below average. The maximum number of hoverfly species were found on a dairy farm, and the minimum number of species was 14. So the most frequently recorded hoverfly on the 39 farms was Episurfus spalteatus, the marmalade hoverfly. This was actually the most recorded species overall. This was followed by Platycherus albumanus, and the third most frequently detected or recorded hoverfly was Melanostoma melinum. So now I want to just show you the picture across the different farm types. So looking at pollinator abundance. So this is data from the 39 farms using the transect walk. So the total number of pollinators recorded, or the average total number of pollinators recorded within each of the different farm sectors. So arable here is standing out above all other farm types as having a higher abundance of pollinators. And this has actually been found previously in the research. And one suggestion for that is that on an arable farm, there may not be many other areas of floral resources for pollinators. So that if a pollinator wants something to eat, they have to go to the hedgerow to get food. So that's why you're more likely to find them along the hedgerows. When you look at species richness, so all the different types of pollinators, there's a different story to be told. So beef, dairy, and mixed farms all have higher species richness compared to arable farms. And this is based on the 25 farms using the transect and the malaise trap data. And just to highlight that the average pollinator species richness across these 25 farms was, so this is all pollinators together, so this is hoverflies and bees, was 19, and 9 farms were above average. But again, this is showing that we've got 16 farms below average. And the maximum number of pollinator species, so the farm that had the most different types of pollinators was an arable farm, and there was 30 pollinator species recorded on that farm. And I think it's worth to note that this farm was actually part of the Teagasc Signpost farmer. Sorry, this farmer is a Teagasc Signpost farmer. So the crucial question is there an association between the pollinator points generated using the scorecard and the abundance and species richness of the pollinators on the farm? So is the scorecard accurately reflecting the pollinators that are on the farms? And yes, is the answer. So if you include the pollinator points for hedgerows, hay meadows, non-farmed areas, not using pesticides, and pollinator-friendly trees, we have found a positive relationship. But this data excludes the points for bird cover, clover pasture, cover crops, herbalaise, and mixed species swards. I'm going to take you through 3 slides of graphs, and it's just showing these positive relationships that have been found. So looking at the farm scorecard and pollinator species richness using the transect data only, you can see that for the bee pollinators, so this is solitary bees and bumblebees together, there is a positive relationship. It's a strong positive relationship between pollinator points and bee species richness. There's also a positive relationship between solitary bee species richness and bumblebee species richness, and also for all pollinator species richness. So this is bringing the solitary bees, the bumblebees, and the hoverflies together. And now when we look at the farm scorecard and the pollinator species richness using 2 different sampling methods, so bringing the transect data and the malaise data together for 25 farms, we still find a positive relationship for the solitary bees, for the bee species richness and pollinator points. So this is solitary bees and bumblebees together, and for the solitary bees separately, and for bumblebees and pollinators. And then lastly, looking at pollinator abundance. So this is all the pollinators that were recorded on the farm. And this is for the 39 farms. There is a moderate positive relationship for bee abundance and bumblebee abundance and pollinator points. So just before I finish up, I wanted to just take you through some other positive aspects of the project. So firstly, I just want to mention the solitary bee nest sites. So in order to join the project, farmers needed to create these solitary bee nest sites on their farms. So 80% of our 102 bee species in Ireland are solitary bees. And solitary bees can only forage within about 200 meters from their home. So you could have a massive field of flowers, but if there's nowhere for those bees to live within that field or close to that field, you won't have these species of bee on your farm. So farmers created 300 bare soil sites and 130 bee boxes were put up by the 40 participant farmers. And just to say that we surveyed these sites after about 4 months, and already a lot of them were occupied. So we had 9 species of mining bees recorded and 4 species of above ground cavity nesting bees. And now is actually a great time to go out. And if you see an area of bare soil with bees flying or hovering around the top of them, this is actually a solitary bee aggregation. So it's a really good time to see these bees emerging from their homes. So the mining bees actually mine tunnels into the ground, and that's where they lay their eggs. And then the cavity nesting bees can live in bee boxes. And this is a really great example of a bee box is right next to some flowers, so they don't have to travel far. And it's actually the leafcutter bee is set of camp here, and you can see the leaves have been cut on the rows and used to cover the holes to show that the nests have been occupied. So these sites, they came in a range of different sizes and shapes and were located in different areas. And it wasn't only the farmer that made them, they had helping hands in some instances where livestock actually make these for you. So it's a great example of farming and nature working together. So from the surveys and the data that we generated, we created an evidence-based action sheet on how to create solitary bee nest sites on your farm. So there's information on where they could be put, whether it should be, what aspect it should be facing, whether it should be sheltered. And then we also have a tips from the farmers section. So you can see that sheltered banks work better than flat ground, and that's just one farmer's input. So straight from the horse's mouth. And lastly, I'd just like to mention the farmer engagement. So we've got 40 fantastic farmers that have engaged with this project. Feedback has been incredible. There's been advice, and the scorecard has evolved over the various years to see what works. We've been very open to finding out the answers, and again, working with the farmers to do that. We've hosted a number of farm walks where there's been peer knowledge transfer and knowledge sharing. And I think this is an invaluable resource, so you can actually see what works. To actually have a visual example. We've hosted a number of training sessions, and these are mostly being online on identifying bees or plants or how to use the scorecard. And then there's a bee-friendly farmer WhatsApp group where the farmers are now coming together and sharing different aspects of biodiversity on their farm or different management practices that they're undertaking. And these pictures are all taken from that WhatsApp group. I think it's great to see that it's not just bees that are getting the attention. We have the door beetle and the moths and the unseen war between aphids and ladybirds. So I have not been alone in doing this work. We've had a fantastic team, and the survey team in 2020 were absolutely brilliant. It was a tough year for a lot of people, everybody, I think. And I think we worked really well to get all those plants and pollinators surveyed across the 40 farms. I have a fantastic operational group that have been contributing to the project throughout the last 4 years. And on that operational group, I have 5 champion farmers that just have been absolutely fantastic. And the other farmers within the group are also coming out as champions themselves. And I must mention Una Fitzpatrick, who's the chair of the operational group and the coordinator of this project. It's been an absolute pleasure to be working with her. So just some take-home messages. So the pollinator scorecard has been developed. It is suitable for a national rollout. There are no input costs. It has a very low administrative burden. It is evidence-based. We are rewarding farms with greater pollinator diversity. It has minimum training requirements, and it is a simple way to encourage interested farmers in becoming more pollinator friendly. And lastly, which I think is absolutely amazing, is that farmers are really interested in learning how to be biodiversity friendly. And what I think is really important for us is that we need to give them the information so that they can take action to help biodiversity. So thank you all very much for your attention. Gura Mágah.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think if the number of questions coming in is any indicator, there's a huge level of interest in what you're presenting. You might just take down your presentation there. Great. I suppose a few quick questions to begin. I think the one thing that will probably be counterintuitive for a lot of people who would expect that the tillage and dairy farms would be less scoring and probably less improving than probably beef and other dry stock farms. Have you any explanation for that, or they seem to be scoring well and then improve more along the way?
Yeah, so there's a couple of explanations out there for that. So, like, one potential is that maybe there's more room for improvement on these farms. So you can see that starting off, so there's more room for improvement is one example. I think for like these livestock farms are potentially providing more nesting habitat for our solitary bees. That's another example.
Okay, and I suppose one other question. I know you were looking at a little bit of broader biodiversity, and I suppose the question arises as to the commonality of what you were assessing from the pollinators to other areas of biodiversity. So, in the work you do for pollinators, how positive is it for other elements of the broader biodiversity? So
we can say without doubt that if you create habitat for pollinators on your farm, you will create habitat for wider biodiversity as well. So there will be positive impacts for other areas of biodiversity. And we did record plants, so you can see that there is a higher diversity for plants, and they are the backbone for all the other life forms.
And I suppose in your conclusion, are you saying that that there's scope for everybody, regardless of the level of intensity at which you're farming, to see substantial improvements on an ongoing basis with proper management? Without doubt, definitely. So even if you could increase the number of flowering plants in your hedge from 2 to 4, that's doubling the amount of resources potentially for pollinators. Okay. Andy, pile of questions coming in.
Loads of questions coming in, Saorla, and loads of really positive comments and loads of appreciation for the work that you're doing. A few maybe specifics. How did the dairy farmers, or do you know, how did they increase their pollinator areas?
So I'll just give you one example to start off with. I know one farm where they moved all their fences out 1.5 to 2 meters from the hedge. So they're reducing the amount of area available for grazing, but they are increasing the amount of habitats, providing food, safety and shelter for pollinators, a great amount. So you may not be able to do that on every hedge on your farm, but maybe there's one hedge where you might do it. And even if you can take this one small action, it can have a really big impact.
Was there any issue with any of the farmers getting the payment, and if they were getting an environmental payment like GLAS or acres or anything? Was there any complications there?
So To date, all farmers have received their payments. There may have been a couple of delays, which I know all farmers are used to. But in terms of gloss payments, so we had to ensure that there were no double payments. So the farmers still received their pollinator points, but if they had received a gloss payment for a permanent pasture, for example, then we wouldn't have double paid.
Okay. There's another question. They were wondering feedback from the farmers about the practicing or the practicalities of cutting hedgerows, maybe 3 years, leaving them for 3 years, and side cutting and and electric fence earthing, and kind of practical things that farmers would say to you. Did you come across those issues, or how did you overcome them?
Definitely. So there are issues, I think, that are across all farming sectors, where there could be negative impacts of allowing hedges to grow. And I think it's about finding the right hedge for the right management. So hawthorn hedges, they grow very slowly. So they won't impact on your electric fence, for example. So within the project, there's been some farmers that would have had that attitude where I needed to cut my hedge every year because it is going to impact on my electric fence, or it is going to scratch the tractor, which is another problem. So by doing these little mini experiments to say, okay, so maybe there's a hedge where you could trial it and do 200 meters and see if it's going to have that kind of an effect. And I think farmers, most of the farmers I've met are all scientists at heart, and they like to do these little experiments to see if it works. So again, identifying the hedge and which one can be managed in different ways. But by cutting your hedges on a 3-year rotation, you are going to increase the amount of flora resources more than tenfold for pollinators.
Okay, and you mentioned as well, and there's a question, kind of two types of question about the farmer doing the scorecard themselves. How long did it take for the farmer to do the scorecard? And also, did you give the farmer training in completing the scorecard?
Yes. So training is provided every year. So we'd always have a refresher training on how you can fill in the scorecard. So I would have met with the farmers in person initially, and then we have annual training. So it depends on the farmer on how long it will take them. They receive the scorecard as an attachment in an email. So it's an Excel spreadsheet that you can either print out and then write on it yourself and take a picture of it and send it in, or you can fill it out in Excel if that suits you better. Now, in terms of the online tool that we have developed, this is our first year running it. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out, because that's going to be a new interface that the farmers are going to use. But we have done a trial run, and there's been very positive feedback about this online tool and using it, the Survey 123 application.
And did you validate any of the results that the farmers did themselves, or did you cross-check them or give them any guidance afterwards? Or
most definitely. So we provide audits annually on at least 10% of the farms.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Any idea why the beef results scores did not increase across the 3 years in the same way as the dairy or arable? Is that?
So again, I think it's similar to what I said to Pat earlier, in that it's not that they didn't, I don't see it as they didn't increase as much as the others. I see that there's been an increase across all sectors, and that maybe there's been wider scope for some farming sectors to increase more than others. I think what you would find on a lot of beef farms is the hedges are not being cut as frequently as they may be on a dairy farm. So there's more scope for a dairy farm to change their management structure. And I think that hedgerows really do play a big part in that.
Have you had any indication from the department on incorporating this approach or as a standard practice into some of the schemes or cap payments or environment schemes? Or?
So the department have been very interested in the project from the onset, and I have fed back over the years all of the work that we've done and all the successful outcomes from it. So I'm hoping that there will be future interest. As it is evidence-based, we are rewarding farms with a greater pollinator diversity. Like, that's incredible that's the outcome from this.
the 14 farms that had above average bee species present, were they the same farms that had above average hoverfly presence, or was
Not,
not necessarily?
no, not necessarily at all. No.
No.
So we've so many different species of pollinators. There are over 180 hoverfly species, for example, and we've got 102 bees in Ireland. So they all have different requirements, and some of them like different flowers, just like we do. We all have different favorite foods. So do the bees, and so do the hoverflies, and also different nesting requirements as well.
There's a comment here. There's more of a comment or a. Are you suggesting that pollinator species are a good metric of habitat condition? It seems that these species are now pinned back to the hedgerows, and now they're coming. Now they're coming for the hedgerows. I mean, I suppose it's like more of a comment than a suggestion, or a. How you mean? I can see what he's getting at. You know, if we're are we pinning everything back into the hedgerows? Is that?
There is potential for that, yes. If there's no floral resources in other areas of the farms, that's where our pollinators are going to go. And I think in Ireland we're so lucky. Like even in your picture there in the background, like the hedgerows, they really make our landscape, I think. And I think it's what makes Ireland so beautiful is these hedgerows, and how we manage them is what's really important for our biodiversity.
Yeah, well, I suspect the comment maybe was that if we're losing hedgerows, then we're in bother, you know.
Yes, let's plant some more.
Yeah.
There's a question in there just about whether you found any rare species, or was it I suppose the more common species, and I suppose it's a thing that resonates in the bird world as well, that we have I suppose improving numbers of the common birds, but a problem with specifics. So was there anything, I suppose, promising in what you found from identifying some of the rare species?
Yes, there was actually. So we found the large carder bee, which was very exciting. As we're walking across fields and recording pollinators, you know, if we found a rare one, we'd always let each other know, oh, look what I have. So it was great to see the large carder bee was actually recorded on 4 of the 40 farms. So this is one of our rarest bumblebees in Ireland. So to find these, and in the surveys that we conducted in 2020, it was recorded on 2 of the farms, but in subsequent years, another farm had created a native hay meadow on their farm, and when I was surveying that, I came across the large carder bee. So it was a great example of how this farm created a native hay meadow for providing food. Flowers for pollinators, and it brought in this really rare bumblebee. So it was absolutely brilliant, like fantastic to see. It was a great day.
There's the question for us, Andy, about whether these kind of practices are going in on Teagasc College and research farms, and the answer to that is yes. There's been a very large increase in hedgerows, a lot of margins being extended. So yeah, we're trying to I suppose practice what we preach a little bit on those farms.
Did you come across any organic farms included in your project? And
so on the onset, we had 4 organic farmers.
Oh,
yeah, were brought in.
And did you notice any discernible increase on them compared to a conventional farm?
Well, if you think about it, so we had 4 organic farms and 36 conventional farms. So it's very difficult to make a comparison between those. You would need a much larger sample size. So it would be ideal if you had 10 conventional farms and 10 organic farms to compare those with.
You'd have like with like. Yeah, you'd nearly need a separate study in its own right.
Exactly. But there have been previous research done on conventional farms and organic farms. And they did find that there was a higher species diversity, species richness and abundance of pollinators on organic farms compared to conventional farms.
Just one, I suppose we've been focused on the positivity of actions, and I suppose one of the key issues we hear about in relation to pollinators is the use of pesticides. and whether or not you were able to identify with, I presume with some of the tillage farms, you had a reduction in the level of use of pesticides during it, and whether that had an impact, or were you able to deduce that?
Yes, so it is playing a significant role in pollinator species richness and abundance. So by not using pesticides, you receive pollinator points. So that's within the scorecard. So, and over the 3-year period, there was 8 farmers that reduced their pesticide inputs across the farms. So it's not about having a blanket not using any pesticides on your farm at all, but perhaps you don't need to use aphicides one year. And it's about, realizing that it's not something that needs to be consistently used annually. So if in year 1 you had no issue with aphicides on your crop and you didn't have to use them, you can get points for that. But in year 2, you notice that actually there's quite a high population of aphids here, I'm going to have to use aphicides. Then you won't get points in year 2, but maybe in year 3, it'll come back to not using the pesticides again. So it's looking at like kind of small ways where you can make a positive impact for pollinators on the farm.
There's a question, Saorla, about the actual monetary benefit to farmers. On average, what was the average payment? Or
thank you. I didn't actually mention that, and I usually do at the onset. So the maximum drawdown a farmer received in any one year would have been €4,000. So that was kind of the top payment. And that was just for the funding that we had for this project. So the range of monetary rewards could be as low as €300 and as high as 4,000. And I think we have 8 farms that are receiving the top payment of 4,000.
Okay.
But some farms have so many points that they could actually get 12,000. Our cap is 4.
Yeah. Was there any breakdown actually? And I think you might have mentioned it briefly, between full-time and part-time farmers. Were the majority part-time or majority full-time?
What were the majority? I haven't actually done a breakdown like that. I'd say maybe 25 to 15 full-time to part-time farmers. So I'd say we have at least 12 farms that the household income would be solely reliant on the farm.
Okay.
So it was
substantial.
Yeah.
And did you have any, or did you collect any data or come across any difference between recently planted hedgerows and, hedgerows that have been there hundreds of years maybe?
So that's where the quality in the scorecard comes into play. So if you're looking at the number of flowering plants in flower within your hedge, so on a newly planted hedge, you're going to have less flowers than you would in a mature hedge. And we also recorded data on the structural aspect of these hedges. And I didn't present it here today, but I have done other data analysis looking at hedgerow structure. So if the hedge width and length across the whole width and length of hedgerows across the whole farm has a positive relationship with pollinator species richness, and yes is the answer.
And I know you're probably entering year 4 now, are you, of your project?
We're in the final year, so December is
there any potential for follow-on support for the farmers in the project? And was there any peer-to-peer learning? Is there potential for discussion groups to come in and talk to our individual farmers to try and get the message out there?
Yeah, so we host a number of farm walks. We've actually got one next Monday at 11:30 if anybody wants to come. It's actually a Teagasc signpost farm walk. So you can email EIP at biodiversityireland.ie if you wanted to come along, but you'll find it on the website. So we have a number of farm walks, and then there's been a lot of peer-to-peer mentoring. And again, it's those farm walks and also the WhatsApp group that we have.
Yeah, a few people actually asked, how can they join the WhatsApp group? And might tell us how you can access your tool that you are using there. Can anybody go in onto your site
Not yet, but I'm hopeful that we might be able to launch it, and we might. So annually, the National Biodiversity Data Centre run the Festival of Farmland Biodiversity. So it's ongoing at the moment, and there's a number of events that you can take part in. So I'm hoping for next May, we might launch the scorecard, and maybe we might be able to identify the most pollinator friendly farm in Ireland using this online tool. So we have to wait and see. It's early days.
Okay.
There's a question there as to whether whether there was any of the farms in upland hill areas, probably not in Kildare, but you got into Wicklow. And was there any differences observed if you did?
Yes, so yeah, we have Wicklow. That would have been our highest uplands. So not your traditional upland farms, but we did have farms with really low intensity, and farms that would have been would have had quite a large number of habitats on the farms for biodiversity. In terms of the Wicklow Kildare farm, they would have created. They actually have, I don't know how many solitary bee nest sites on the farm that have either been created by the farmer or livestock, or just there naturally in the landscape because of the upland nature of it. So the number of nest sites reflects the diversity of bees that were recorded on that farm.
And I suppose it's a real, I suppose, and going back to the acre scheme, we had the heaps of sand for solitary bees, which weren't particularly successful, but it's really good now that has kind of merged into better knowledge, and that we now have measures that from what you're saying are really applicable and really potentially really successful.
Exactly. Yeah.
One other specific one, or a question or a comment really here, dry ditches or drains that would only carry water, maybe sometimes it mightn't carry them at all during the year, depending on the year, or might carry it for a couple of months of the year. Would fencing off dry ditches and not allow grazing in spring and summer help increase habitats for bees?
That's a really good question. And just from my own experience, and from from this data center is what we are saying is it's about creating and maintaining and enhancing habitats for biodiversity. But for me, what I'm noticing now is it's not just about creating, maintaining and enhancing, but we also need to diversify. So I would not say that it's one rule fits all. I would say that potentially if you fenced one drain and hedge on your farm, you're going to create a unique habitat, and it's going to provide a certain number of plant species there. But on another hedge, maybe you shouldn't fence it, because then your livestock are going to be able to rub up against the side and create solitary bee nesting sites. So I was on a farm walk last month, and we were standing in the middle of a field. It was in the center, and there was a hedge on the right and a hedge on the left. The one on the right was fenced. So you could see that it was fenced with 1.5 meter margin. And there was great diversity of flowering plants within that margin. The one on the left wasn't fenced. And there was this fabulous aggregation of Andrina, a solitary mining bee. So you've got the nesting site and you've got the food right there. So I think diversify, and that's what I would say, is to create lots of different types of habitats on the farm, and then you'll get lots of different species.
And I suppose that complies with, I suppose, the conversations we've had on this program before, talking about making sure that there is a continuity throughout the season of food sources, I suppose, in particular. And how do you try and ensure that within this project?
And again, having a diversity of flowering plant species on the farm. So willow at the beginning of the year is really important food source for some solitary bees. And ivy then at the end of the year, they could be the only two food sources for these solitary bees. So they're two different species. They're the only plants that they will feed on. So if you don't have those flowers on your farm, you won't get those solitary bees.
And a couple of comments and questions really, and I don't think you directly did it in your project, but did you see any other biodiversity benefit that resulted from your pollinator-friendly actions? Advantages for birds or lizards, amphibians, small mammals, or?
So we didn't record those directly. But if you do have a higher number of pollinators, then you'll have a higher rate of pollination. So it's the pollinator that's going to pollinate a hawthorn flower or a whitethorn flower and turn it into a berry. So if you've got higher rates of pollination, you're going to have a higher number of berries. So you've got higher food sources for birds. And likewise with hedgerows as well, you can say that if, you're not cutting your hedges as frequently, you're going to provide more nesting sites for birds. And then with looking at other newts, we wouldn't have looked at that at all.
But you would expect even hoverflies that they would increase be more food for birds,
Exactly, yeah. But there's other positive benefits of having these pollinators in your farm that could have value for farmers. So hoverflies are natural predators of aphids. So by having a larger number of hoverflies, you're going to have your own free pest control. Yeah.
Integrated pest management. And I mean, there's a few comments as well on, other areas that possibly a similar project could look at, like, wetlands and that also have a huge amount of, biodiversity benefits and that are in danger of being lost as well. A similar type project could possibly be engaged to look at that.
I suppose, Andy, there's a new round of funding for EIPs coming up. Where do you see yourself? Do you see an attempt to extend this project or to change the focus, or do you see yourselves putting in another application to learn more? Because there's no question there's a lot of learnings from this that can go into policy.
Definitely. And yes, I would love to submit an application. The call hasn't come up yet, and we're all wondering when this might happen. But yeah, so we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, that's another good practical suggestion someone has made is before the scorecard is launched, should farmers be using the farmland guidelines from the All Ireland Pollinator Plan?
Definitely, yes, 100%. They're fantastic guidelines, and the hope is that from all the evidence that we've generated from this EIP is that we can feed into the next version of the farmland guidelines. So yeah, it's a fantastic resource.
Yeah. Unfortunately, Andy, I think we're going to have to cut it there. There was a good few questions still there to be answered, and we'll forward those on. Maybe there was a couple of kind of highly technical ones that you might just follow up on from a couple of questioners.
Yes.
Just like thank you once again. I think you have really engaged our audience this morning, and just absolutely fascinating. And I think it shows a degree of positivity and potential there for achieving positive outcomes in an area where I suppose for many years we've been trying, and this is giving real pointers as to how we might go about organising this kind of work in the future and paying farmers based on results. So I think thank you very much for that and really appreciate it. Next week, we're delighted that we'll be joined by Dr. Evie Nihulawan, who is the chair of the Citizens Assembly on Biodiversity Loss. And she'll be joining us discussing the Citizens Assembly and the findings. So that should be a really interesting follow-on to, I think, this morning's presentation. So until then, thank you again, Saorla, and to Andy and Yvonne for their work in terms of putting this series together. Enjoy your week, and we'll see you again next week.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.